Well, hello everybody, and welcome to my show. My name is Jason DeCosta, and this is Consistent Preterism. Thank you for joining me today. Hope everybody's doing well out there. Just wanted to rant a little bit about the ambiguity of the Bible, specifically the New Testament. And really the theme of this little rant while I drive here, just because I feel like spitting, is just the amount of ambiguity in the New Testament specifically. Let's just put aside the Old Testament for a second, because let's be real, most Christians, probably 95 percentile, do not read the Old Testament, right? And the ones that do, for lack of a better term, have their head so far up their ass in terms of what it means, that they can see what they ate for breakfast. Anyway, so let's talk about ambiguity, right? You have people that actually believe that these are the very words of God, the creator of the universe, creator of heaven and earth, the creator of humanity, the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega. This is his message to humanity, right? You have a highly confusing, highly debated, violently debated book called the Bible. And you have these letters and writings and literature in the New Testament part of the Bible that are just ferociously debated in all various sects and forms of Christianity, and even debated in non-Christian groups like IOers, like myself, myth people, which some IOers are mythical. I am. There's all different genres of, or camps, I should say, that debate violently and ferociously and competitively about the Bible. And so there is no clear-cut message in the Bible, right? I mean, someone might say, well, the clear-cut message is that Christ died for your sins. But no, that's not a clear-cut message. That's how you're interpreting the message based on your presuppositions, based on your upbringing, based on, indoctrination that you've inherited and that has been implanted in you like a chip ever since you were either a kid, a teenager, a young adult, or maybe you're a late life Christian, right? That can happen too. And it happens for a number of reasons, right? For me, it happened because I had a radical encounter with a spiritual divine being that changed me in the blink of an eye and really gave me an interest in learning about what the heck was that. And so I, took a liking to the Bible. It's what I knew. It was what was in my family, right? I had heard enough about it to know that, all right, where else am I going with this, right? Am I just going to, start going to the beach and worshiping the sun as it comes up every morning? Or am I going to do what most, good American people do, and most people anyway, not just American, and pick up the Bible and start learning about Christianity? So that's what I did. But it can also happen, becoming a Christian can also happen just based on association, right? I mean, you could just say, hey, you want to come to church with me this weekend? And the person is like, yeah. And then next thing you know, they're a Christian. And so there's a lot of that going on where it's kind of like added to the pot of life, if you will, to make people feel good, to make people feel better. It's a, free form of counseling, especially if you're a cheapskate that doesn't throw anything in the offering plate. Otherwise, it costs you about a 20 each week to get some counseling. A little God twist on it, a little twist of God instead of twist of lime. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons why people come into Christianity. But the problem is that you can argue that the Bible's very clear about the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, but I can argue, as an IOer, that you're wrong, that the gospel is not about you, and that the gospel was going to go to all nations, and then the end would come. And they were living in that end. That was the imminence that is projected all over the New Testament writings. They were in that end. They were about to experience these things. Paul said there is about to be, literally, Greek word melo, about to be a resurrection of the just and unjust. This is the final resurrection, right? Both parties, just and unjust, stand before the throne. And the books are open. So, it's mythical, it's magical, it's fairy tale-ish. It's got all the elements that you would expect from an apocalyptic, last days Messiah, Israel restored type novel, or literature, I should say. And, so I would argue that you're wrong about Christ dying for your sins, that it was more contextual, that it was more exclusive, that it was related to the last days that they were living in and waiting for the coming of the Messiah and the resurrection of the dead, the judgment, and the inheritance of all things. Now, You can say that, yes, that already happened, like the full preterists do, and then claim that there's more, right? But that's illogical, and that's insanity, and that makes no sense, right? It violates all principles of basic human dignity and common sense and logic. Tosses those things in the trash, right? So we need to abide by these principles that we know are correct, like logic. That's a big one, right? Like if I said 2 + 2 = 7, you would know that I'm full of shit. Okay, that's logic, that's common sense. And that's how apparent I.O. is in the New Testament letters, right? The ending, the time element, the imminence that we find in the New Testament letters demands the story be I.O. Let me repeat that for you in case you didn't pick up what I'm putting down. The imminence, the fact that the last days is what we are reading when we get to the New Testament. Now, I know the New Testament name itself, New Testament, can kind of be confusing. It's a bit misleading. But that's what they called it, this collection of literature, apocalyptic, end of the age, the end is at hand, let's go out, there's a mission going on, all these, different types of letters, epistles, writings, they're all last days themed. So they're all staring down the last days. They're right there. They're within an arm's reach, right? They were expecting to experience and partake in these things very, very soon. And so that's important, because when you understand what that means, you fall right into I.O., ancient Israel only, because an imminent ending, when the gospel would have gone to all nations and the end would come, when Paul said the fullness of the nations would be gathered in, and in this way all Israel would be saved, when all those who were Christ were raised at his coming, and then came the end, an imminent ending that defines a fullness, defines a completion, a pleroma, like Paul said in Romans 11, demands that I.O. is true. Because if I.O. were not true, then you would have a fullness of random nations. You would have a fullness of random humans, fullness of random individuals. And that makes no sense, right? You're seeking just a bunch of randoms? That doesn't make sense, right? If you're seeking your child out from a crowd, you're seeking someone specific. You're looking for your son. You're looking for your daughter. You're not just looking for anybody, right? You're not just like, hey, anybody, is anybody there? No, you're looking for your son. Jack, where the hell are you? Same deal. Okay, Jesus is looking for his sheep. He would take the 99 to go seek the one. These are the lost sheep. He says he only comes for them, and they're called sheep all throughout the New Testament letters. So I'm going down a rabbit hole here, but my point in this is that you can claim that there's unambiguity in the fact that, this Jesus guy supposedly died for everybody's sins. But that would be incorrect, because there's many groups, many different opinions on that. Some opinions would say that it's all a myth. It doesn't mean anything. It's just nonsense. It has no meaning. The letters are all, written by different people. There's no cohesiveness. This is an argument that was presented on Tristan's podcast with Derek the other day, and I commented on it. And really, the problem with this argument, it's just a very elementary level, very, very easy to refute argument. If you just use a little, again, common sense and logic. Their argument is that the New Testament letters are all written from different periods in time, different authors, and they all had different things in mind. And the fact that they have, differences should be enough to tell you that there's no way that it's I.O., right? That's the logic in the argument. And it's so ridiculously easy to refute. Like, I wish someone would bring this up with me in a live discussion, right? Because I would just crank this sucker so far out of the park, you wouldn't find it anymore, okay? There's cohesiveness, there's unity, there's similarity all over the New Testament, right? All of the letters are speaking about an imminent end. They're all in the last days. They're all in that period, looking forward to when the temple would be destroyed. And Caleb shared a video and sent it to me via email, Caleb Graham, on his YouTube channel, which kind of, spurred my interest in talking about this. Honestly, it kind of reminded me of a few things. But they're all looking at the fall of Jerusalem, the end of the age, the destruction of the temple, yada, yada, yada. It's all there. So if you're going to argue that these authors weren't in unity, they weren't on the same page, I hate to say it, dude, but you're a bonehead, right? I mean, Derek said it. He knows I love him. I'm not trying to be an ass. I'm just saying. The reality is that you're not making sense. You're not being consistent, because you know that there's consistency all throughout. They're all looking for the end. They're all looking for the coming of the Lord. They're all about to experience the resurrection. All the letters talk about it. All the letters talk about being saved from the curse and the handwritten requirements and the law. There's some nuances, of course, sure. There's difficult things to understand, like why does Paul seem to be preaching you don't have to partake in the law of Moses message to the pagans, or to the pagan Israelites, I should say, while the other disciples are preaching a keep every point of the law message, like James. Well, that's very easy, actually, and I'm not going to get into it, but you know the answer, right? I'll tell you anyway. What the hell? Paul's dealing with lost, non-law practicing Israelites. They're not practicing the law. They have not the law. This is what Paul says to them, but they would be judged because the law was written on their hearts. That's the link right there, okay? And they're not practicing the law, so why would they have to partake and uphold the law that they don't even practice? Makes no sense. Instead, Paul told them, stay as they were, all right? Whatever they were, Jew, Greek, slave, free, stay as they were called, was the exact words, because the end was nigh. And of course, Paul did meet with the council in Acts 15, and they discussed what they should do with these Israelites because they're not circumcised and all these things. And the agreement was that they would have to uphold just a few little laws. I think it was, refrain from strangled things, or, blood, do not consume blood, or I don't know, a couple things. Sexual immorality was one. So they were told to partake of a few of the commands, but overall, these ones were justified through faith because they were not partaking of the law, but they were still guilty. They were guilty of not being circumcised, right? These are the handwritten requirements of the law that they were guilty of violating. James, on the other hand, and guys like Peter, told their audience that they should, basically take hold of every last point of the law, said James. They should not neglect it. In fact, Paul, when he was talking about the Jews in Romans 3, says that they should, in fact, uphold the law, right? So there was this difference between the Israelites who were non-law practicing and the Israelites who were law practicing. And so that's why you see two different messages. But I'm getting way off track here. Just to go back to say, there's consistency and cohesiveness all throughout the Bible. Every book talks about Jesus in its own way, right? And they'll say, yeah, but there's differences. Of course there's differences, right? That's what makes it unique. That's what makes it interesting, right? In my opinion, the fact that they're not all completely the same, and I've heard this actually used in apologetics, is a pretty good indicator of the fact that this concept is not true, right? This concept of, oh, they're so far apart and they were written decades, and who knows when they were written, right? By the way, I mean, nobody does, right? These are all guesses. These are all people just guessing. But I mean, writings and literature back in the first century were wackadoodle, okay? So who really knows, right? For all we know, this stuff could have been written in the 2nd century, long after the fall of Jerusalem, right? As sort of like just a playwright or a tale or something like that, right? About the restoration of Israel through that destruction of the temple in the end of their age. I mean, it could have been. Probably the more likely scenario, actually, since they're all so focused on the fall of Jerusalem, and since we don't believe that something as supernatural as that could happen, right? We're not believers in prophecy and people just predicting everything like Jesus did, rising from the dead, healing the dead, walking on water, right? We don't see that in our everyday lives, so therefore it's tough to believe, right? That's why I take the position that I do, that this is all just a story. But who cares about when it was written, right? Caleb said that too, right? Like, when are we going to start looking at the subject matter, right? And deal with that? Because when you do, you realize that they're all in agreement, pretty much. There's some subtle differences, which makes it actually more powerful, in my opinion, right? If they were all just in unity, of course it would be, kind of dumb, right? But they all have these subtle differences, but they all remain focused on the objective, on the goal, on the fact that Christ died for their sins, their trespasses, that he was coming again, and all these things. So you're going to mean to tell me that they can agree pretty much on all these details, the timing, the nature, what would happen, right? The resurrection, judgment, everything about to take place, the fall of Jerusalem, the Holy Spirit, all this stuff that they agree on. But you're going to tell me that they don't have any clue about who their audience is and that IO is untenable because of that? I mean, give me a break. That's nonsense. Lame argument. Okay, so IO stands unrefuted, and that actually just helps the argument. So anyway, I don't even remember what the point of this freaking video was, to be quite honest, because I've been ranting. Just doing like 60 on this road here. But I just wanted to rant and let you know that the ambiguity in the New Testament is certainly nothing to hang your hat on, right? I mean, it's brutal. There's so much disagreement. There's so many things that, you could just look at and say, how did you come to that conclusion based on that sentence, right? I mean, these massive leaps, these jumping to conclusions, these forming theories and doctrines and theologies off of, scriptures that could literally mean anything. I mean, throw it at the wall, see what sticks. But this is supposedly God's message to humanity, the most important message of all time, loaded with ambiguity. Like Tristan said once or twice, that there's probably less than 1% textual relevance to people in the Bible in terms of like what they might be able to point to for a place that might be talking about them. And I mean, I really emphasize the might, like a you-know-what, all right? They might be talking about them. And I would say it's probably way less than half of 1%. I don't even think there's 1%, all right? Because you got all these just useless accounts, all these genealogy, like so much of the Bible is just nonsense. But then you have this massive body of textual evidence that proves IO, right? It just proves that, A, it was IO, and then when you get to the New Testament, it's really IO, but it's a mission for IO, and that mission would conclude at the end, which was basically at hand, and, the time was short. So, and then you have this, 0.5% of confusing portions, which probably equals like 10 sentences or like 20 sentences, where you could, if you were a Christian, you could maybe point to and say, but look, it says this, right? And, when you're thinking about a court, I always give this as an example. When a judge is investigating or, taking in and observing the evidence for the case, they're looking for preponderance of evidence. They're looking for the overwhelming evidence that they can string together, and they can say, wow, you know what? This comes at this guy from a number of different angles, and it really just screams he's the one. He did this, right? Well, that's what a good judge does. That's what a court does, right? It looks at the evidence, but not in Christianity, though. Christianity is the one place where you don't have to look at the evidence, right? You can just take the 0.5% of maybes, of huge maybes, of complete speculation with nothing concrete whatsoever, all the while ignoring the 98% stack of just brutal, unambiguous, clear, no two ways about it, no misunderstanding, no miscalculation. I come only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel statements, and just toss those aside as if they don't even exist. It's crazy. It's absolute craziness. How someone could think that this book of ambiguity is meant to be the blueprint for life, right? The blueprint. When in fact, the blueprint, supposedly, the Bible, didn't even come to be until a few hundred years ago on a wider scale. I mean, non-existent before 300 AD. So for thousands of years there was no Bible. Non-existent for the majority of society from the time it came to be all the way up until whatchamacallit. Sorry, a little distracted here. Non-existent until the time it came to be, all the way up until maybe a few hundred years ago. And then it, got a little more widespread. But up until that point, it was very difficult to obtain, never mind even read a Bible, because a lot of society was illiterate. And that was the case in, the early centuries for sure. So anyway, again, I just keep going off topic here. But the fact that this is considered to be this blueprint for humanity to me is wild, because it's really nonsense when you think about it. How many people did not even have a chance at looking at this blueprint for life? Not even a chance. Right? And if you tell that to a full preterist, that's post 70, right? That's, they have their ways. Oh, Jesus ascended down into Hades and preached to all the dead souls. Yeah, of course he did. But we're talking about post 70, post resurrection, right? You're telling me that all these people that didn't see a Bible had no clue what was in it. We're so far removed from what was in it. Now think about us today who actually know what's in it. And we still can't rub two nickels together in terms of what it's actually saying. Well, I know I.O. can, but I'm just speaking in general here about Christians. They argue and argue and argue, and nobody can agree. Now, imagine someone who never even saw it. They have no clue at knowing what it's talking about. At least people today can read it and be like, this might mean this, right? Yeah, cool. Shave your head, right? Oh, cool. But those people didn't even read the thing. Never even opened it. Never even touched one. So this is the blueprint, huh? Wrong. I just don't see it. The difference between me and others is I can still believe in God without having to hold on to the Bible. I don't need the Bible to believe in God. I still have hope. I have hope. I would rather say, I don't know, and just be honest, and just have faith in the Creator, whoever He is, whoever she is, whoever it is, and just be thankful, have a thankful heart, be grateful. Like Tristan said, I really felt that. There's been times where I've been so thankful that I've come to borderline tears, just driving in the car, just overwhelming, like, wow, like you truly take care of me. When things could have gone real bad and they didn't, or when I was, saved, if you will, from certain situations that I look back on and I'm like, wow, like I really had no clue how bad that could have went, but somehow I came out, unscathed. So anyway, I've arrived at my destination and I have nothing else to say. I hope you all enjoyed the rant. Don't really remember what the topic was, but I'm sure it was pretty fun to listen to. So anyway, hope you all have a wonderful day. Give it a like, a Ruski, leave a comment, and we'll catch you on the next one. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.